This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, the subject is truth. It is the second in my trilogy on truth. Dr. Ian Markham is my guest, and the conversation will begin in a moment. Ian Markham is my guest. He is the Dean of the Virginia Theological Seminary, and he is an Episcopal priest. And we will be talking about the subject of truth, truth as it relates to religion, truth in general, secular and non-secular truth. So welcome, Dean Markham. If you could just give me a couple of minutes of background about who you are, where you come from, and things that you've written about the subject of truth.
Thank you very much for inviting me on. So yes, I'm the Dean and President of Virginia Theological Seminary. I was originally educated in the United Kingdom. I collected degrees from the University of King's College London, the University of Cambridge, and the University of Exeter in Devon. And I'm the author of Truth and the Reality of God, which is my major monograph on the questions of truth and how we understand truth and how you make truth claims in religion.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me just start off with the idea is truth in your belief fundamentally associated with God? Because I could think there could be non-secular truths. Let's say if two kids are shooting marbles and one kid says that he's got 20 marbles that are worth $100 a piece, but he doesn't want to show them to the next kid. He's just showing off. Would that necessarily be a truth that involves God? Or when we talk, because usually when we think of God and truth, we think of life and death situations, not trivia.
I make the extraordinary, and I concede this is an unusual claim. You won't find many philosophers of religion making this claim, but I do argue in Truth and Reality of God that actually even trivial truth claims about marbles or about tables or chairs are remarkable. Because the interesting thing about a truth claim is you're saying the world is intelligible, it makes sense, it's ordered, the human mind has the capacity to explain it and understand it. Now these are metaphysical claims. You're making a claim that the universe is ordered and predictable and stable, and that the human mind has the capacity to make sense of that order. And I think if you ask the question then, so how come is the universe ordered? How come is it possible that you can make a truth claim? I think you, in the end, have to say it's either a remarkable fluke that we're able to do that, or it's for a universe which is a result of intention and design.
It's interesting that you talk about order in concert with truth, because the prior show to this one that I did was on the idea of entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, and whether order tends towards disorder. So it sounds like you're saying, in effect, that truth is almost a cosmic law. Am I correct in that?
The conditions that enable truth claims to take place require a set of assumptions about the nature of the universe, which indeed involves intention and order. So in that sense, yes, truth itself is not a cosmic law. Truth is a result of a cosmic law. That's the way to look at it.
But one truth, well, without reason, without a sentient mind, can truth in and of itself exist if there isn't someone to make that determination? I.e., if we're just talking about fish wandering about in the sea and they can't actualize or think of what truth is, could there be truth in a cosmos without sentient observers then, without human beings?
I think you're right to say that in such a universe there wouldn't be any description of truth, but nevertheless I would want to say that there's still an accurate way in which the universe should be understood. Yeah. And when you find that accurate way, maybe there are fish in the sea or whatever propositions you use, when you find that accurate way, that is still within a universe that's ordered. I mean, Bishop Berkeley, and the great idealist philosopher, did take the view that in the end, truth is possible because all truths are known to the sentient mind, which is God. And I think that's true, yes.
Let me then ask a question, and we'll to sort of go off of that for a few minutes. Is truth always good? We can think that truth may always be correct, epistemologically, ontologically, etc. But is truth always the good thing? In other words, can a truth sometimes be bad, have negative consequences?
Oh, definitely. No, I mean, so let's separate out a couple of distinctive claims I want to make. One is that there's something quite remarkable about truth claims, and I think it makes a certain set of assumptions about the nature of the universe, which points to theism, so there's that. And then you have, under what circumstances should you always strive to truth? Actually, I'm a fan of careful ignorance. So to take a really contentious contemporary example, I'm not really a big fan of the enthusiasm for DNA screening. I think you can learn versions which are true, like, for example, I've got a 60% chance of having Parkinson's or dementia, and you then establish yourself as a genetically sick person. And I think all that data is actually unhelpful to know about. So conceptually, I'm very committed to the quest for truth. But I think there are certain areas where it's probably better for humans to be ignorant about. What people really think about you, might be something you don't necessarily need to know all the time. What I really think of my wife's dress, I perhaps shouldn't necessarily tell her exactly what I think. So there's a whole set of the possibility of truth is made possible by theism. But actually, the obligation to seek truth is one that you should do with some care. Yeah. And there are circumstances where a little bit of ignorance doesn't hurt at all.
But because you, for example, would not want to know something about your genetic background, you wouldn't prescribe that for others to not know. For example, it might be if someone was planning to have a child and they know that they were to find out, say, there's an 80% chance that there's some kind of cystic fibrosis or some kind of very bad illness that they could have, that they would say, well, we won't have our own child, we'll adopt a child. So you, just because you would not want to know that truth, you wouldn't disallow others from wanting to seek their own truth, if you will.
No, I agree with you that in that respect I'm a libertarian. I think people should make these decisions themselves about how much information they want about themselves. I do think there should be government regulation around it, though, because, of course, once this data is available by a company that collects it, I mean, you don't necessarily want insurance companies to know. You don't want, you might not want other people to know, period. Yeah. So you have a whole set of privacy concerns that arise in this area. And it is, I think, a serious one. But no, I'm a libertarian. So if others want that data, then of course. So the quest for truth is, for some people, there are some people who just love knowing the way things are and are very determined to discover everything they can. And they're entitled to make those decisions for themselves. However, I would counsel them, when you embark on this journey, just be really careful the sorts of things you can discover and how you cope with that information.
And conversely, since we're talking of truth, we have to talk of what's generally considered its opposite, untruth or a lie. There would have to be times when a lie is a good thing. If I'm hiding Anne Frank in my attic and the Nazis come knocking at the door, or if I'm ferrying slaves on the Underground Railroad to freedom in the North or to Canada, it would be good to lie to the authorities because they are unethical, immoral in what they are trying to do, correct? So lie is not always bad either.
I would commend ethically the practice of evasion over the downright lie because, of course, you do pay a price every time you lie, and that is you erode the depth of trust in the relationship.
Well, but let me ask you, I mean, if a Nazi stormtrooper, I mean, I'm not going to have a relationship with a Nazi stormtrooper. Yeah.
Right, that's true.
Yeah.
So in that extreme case,
Yeah.
yes, I think it's ethically appropriate to lie
Yeah.
as much as you possibly can
Mm.
to avoid the potential risk of death of a Jewish person. But as a general rule, in my dealings with others, if I'm disinclined to tell the truth, I would commend the practice of evasion, changing the topic, saying, well, I wouldn't put it quite like that. So there are all sorts of things you navigate. The reason why you don't want to, let's try and avoid talking about our president just in a minute, but you do run risks every single time you decide not to be morally serious about the quest for what really is the case, and communicate in such a way that you knowingly communicate things which are not true. You do pay a price. You pay a price in terms of trust and the stature of what you then report, and
Well, as you refer to price, you're taking human relationships. Do you think that there's sort of a ledger, if you're a believer in God, that God keeps sort of like Santa checking off his list and checking it twice kind of thing, that just by not telling the truth, you are putting negatives on your life score sheet? Now, they may not be as big a negative as if you're a robber or a rapist or a murderer, but nonetheless, it's still a negative in your relationship with God.
I prefer to put it perhaps more simply. I think what happens is the goal of creation is for God to create persons who have the capacity to give and receive love and operate in the realm of healthy and constructive and life-giving relationships. So that's the goal. So it's not so much God sitting there with a checklist saying, this person has, had dirty thoughts, and this person has lied, and this person has, been left their trolley cart in the middle of a parking space and getting frustrated with the negatives and totaling them all up. The way I tend to look at it is the goal of living is to be a person who is well integrated, balanced, and has healthy relationships built upon integrity. That's the goal. And that's the Christian project. That's what we're all in the business of trying to cultivate. And therefore, when you repeatedly erode a relationship in terms of trust, you damage who you are. So judgment is, in Christian theology, judgment is actually something we bring on ourselves. Hell is a self-imposed reality. God doesn't send anybody to hell. God, simply the consequences of living mean we create the hell for ourselves by living lives that are fundamentally disordered.
Let me just ask then about the origin of truth. A scientist would say, someone who's an evolutionist would say that, well, deceit served an evolutionary purpose. If I'm a human ancestor and I know the grove where the best bananas or where the best mango fruits or where the best whatever is to eat, it is imperative on me to pass on my genes, and by eating the best fruit, the most fruit, I will be bigger and stronger than my simian cohorts, will be able to pass on my genes. So therefore, lying is an adaptive quality that has an evolutionary explanation. Truth is something that probably came later as these creatures evolved towards what we would consider humanity. But if you are of a religious nature and you believe in biblical literalism that God created human beings and whatnot, is there any rationale to explain, for example, why Eve would have lied about the apple or the forbidden fruit, whatever fruit it might have been? Is there a similar, I guess, reason for truth to exist in a universe created by a God? God must be testing that. There must be some reason that He made truth.
So a couple of thoughts in response to the question. The first is I concur entirely with the scientific narrative about the origins of the world, and I take the older, ironically, Christian position. So if you go back to Augustine of Hippo and his commentary on Genesis, where Augustine makes clear that the Genesis stories are poetry, and the right way to interpret them is to see in the poetry an analysis of what it is to be human and how we function as human. So what's interesting about Genesis narrative is God creates through the act of speaking. Now, as you know, thoughts are expressed through words. So the poetry behind all that is, the creation reflects the very thought and mind of God. Because it comes out. So the extraordinary beauty of the creation, the order of the creation, this is a result of agency and intention. And therefore you actually have the concept of truth grounded in Genesis 1. By the time you get to Genesis 2, you have humans trying to order the world, so through the act of naming, we distinguish ourselves from animals, and through the act of behaviour, we actually discover there are limits to what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. So the great discovery in the Genesis myth is that ultimately human lives need to operate in a sort of framework where not every appetite is constantly satisfied. So the truth of it is we shouldn't strive to satisfy our sexual appetite all the time. We shouldn't strive to satisfy our gluttony tendency all the time. We shouldn't strive to satisfy our propensity to drink to excess. I mean, appetites need to be restrained, right? And that's the whole idea of religion. It's a way of living life of integrity, grounded in relationships that are healthy with each other, and recognizing appropriate restraints on how we behave and how we relate to each other. So that's the insight. I believe all that's true. So I believe Genesis 1 to 3 is true, and is completely compatible with the scientific narrative. Now, truth then is, the result of divine agency creating an ordered universe. So the very fact that we can describe the world accurately is itself a miracle. Mm-hmm. And then the reasons to live lives of truth is to actually live lives of integrity with each other. Now, sometimes you lie in the situation of Anne Frank. But Eve lives, of course, in the great myth, and she, in the end, faces the consequences of that lie. And that is a disordered relationship with the environment, with each other, and with God.
Now, let me ask, since you were saying that you have consonant views, I guess you call it a compatibilist with religion and scientific views. Do you then believe that God is a person, that you have a personal relationship with God, or is God, in your view, the cosmos itself, that God is all around in all things and not personified, or is God personal to you?
I believe, perhaps my favourite metaphor is an embryo growing inside the life of a woman, although it's, but let's try this. So the universe, if you like, is like an embryo. And therefore there is a very real sense in which everything is sustained and made possible by the reality of God. And this universe is huge, and it probably involves multiverses. So it's a very big entity inside the life of God. And then, but God is not reducible to it. In other words, embraces everything as it is, but is bigger than, in the same sense that the embryo has some autonomy and functions sort of almost independently of the woman, and yet simultaneously is completely dependent on the woman. So my concept of God is that God is both everywhere and in everything, and I'm part of God and sustained and enabled by God. Yet I do have pre-agency, like the embryo can kick, and and when the embryo is sick, the mother might not necessarily be sick herself, but the embryo can be sick. So you can have a lot of autonomy inside the life of God, but God is not reducible to the universe. God embraces and includes the universe and is bigger than the universe.
Yeah, the reason I asked was because, as it relates vis-a-vis to truth, if we have a personal God, if God is a thing that is personified in some way, maybe not embodied as we are, but does have a distinct personality, a distinct godness to him, it, she, he, then lie or deceit, I would think, is something that a personal God could take offense to or take umbrage to. Whereas if God is disembodied, if God is everywhere, then it seems a bit harder to reckon God taking kind of an offense to an untruth or a deliberate lie. Does any of that make sense to you?
I think the question's a good one. So I don't want God to be too anthropomorphic. So I do believe God has, for want of another word, a center of consciousness. So you're talking about a spirit which is vast, that embraces everything that is, and does have a center of consciousness. So in that sense, God received my prayers, but of course God also knows every single anxiety and worry and sorts of things I'm going to pray about and so on. So it's now, does God take umbrage when I lie? I wouldn't put it like that. In the end, the goal of creation, God's not petty, right? God's not sitting there going, oh dear, that's just really out of order, I'm upset about that. My picture is that, and the reason why God can't be petty is because you're talking about a process which is 13.7 billion years, which involves potentially other universes and numerous galaxies, almost certainly platforms on other planets. So the sort of picture you want to have is that God is not ticking off in a sort of endlessly critical way the problems or difficulties or our behaviors that God might disapprove of. It's more wants us to flourish. And therefore, when it comes to truth, living lives of integrity, which is the key part of truth, is itself the goal. And therefore, God's more wounded by a hurt, by a lie, than angry. Because in the end, it messes us up. We don't operate as well as agents that are being transformed from egotism and selfishness to love and acceptance.
Well, I was thinking of some examples. I grew up as a Lutheran. I was raised in the Lutheran Church. I'm agnostic now. But I've been watching some old, there was a television show called Davy and Goliath, because I'm going to later this year interview the daughter of the fellow who did the old Davy and Goliath TV show, which was a Lutheran show with little puppets that acted out morality plays. But anyway, I was thinking of the Abraham and Isaac story, myth, if you will, and I don't recall if that's in Genesis or not, or if it's after Genesis, but I was thinking that it's an interesting tale to deal with lie, because if we accept that God, embodied or disembodied, knows all, and this gets into ideas of free will and whatnot, but God would have known that Abraham would have sacrificed his son to please God. And so asking Abraham to do something that he would have known anyhow seems to be odd. And so most people look at that tale and they think it's about Abraham and his belief or his love for God. But to me, it also centers around truth, because not Abraham's or Isaac's truth, but the fact that God knows the truth in that tale, that Abraham will do this. And it becomes kind of pointless for him to make Abraham do that, since he has to know that Abraham is going to to be willing to sacrifice his son before God, says, no, you don't need to do that. So in that sense, in that tale at least, is God lying to Abraham? It seems a kind of pointless tale in that sense, if God is all-knowing, from a truth perspective.
It is an extraordinary narrative, and in many ways the poets and the artists, I think, are the ones who actually make most sense of it, because it is an extraordinary story, and it's one that one approaches almost nervously because of its power. And certainly a priori, God asked me to sacrifice my son, I would just say no. But I would probably say more than that. I would suspect that isn't God. So in other words, I would question, in the ancient world, human sacrifices were a commonplace. It's a story that might be best interpreted as the Jewish people realizing that human sacrifice isn't necessary for God. That I think is all true. I think that I don't actually think that God knows exactly what free creatures will do in the future. So in other words, when God created creatures with the capacity to make decisions and to exercise genuine human freedom, which in some sort of mysterious sense I would want to say is uncaused. So here I draw on new physics, and I'm very grateful to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and the mysteries of that narrative that seems to open up some space for genuine human agency and decision that isn't simply a result of environmental or genetic or even brain neurons firing. I think God genuinely is never sure what free creatures will decide. So my response is on lots of levels. One is, I don't take the story as history. I don't think God will tell anybody that they should sacrifice a child. It plays a certain role in Jewish history as an example of the Jewish people realizing God wants human sacrifices. And anyway, God will ask us to do things, and God isn't entirely sure what we're going to then decide, because I do believe that there's temporality in the life of God, which means that we are shaping the future with God, and God is trusting our decisions for the next segment of creation, and we can and do often surprise is perhaps too strong a word, but act in ways that God would feel is not in the end leading to human fulfillment and love.
In current society here in the West, in the U.S. Particularly, the idea of an idea of the last few decades is moral relativism, and a lot of people will assent to it, and I think that has a lot of good ideas. I also think there's areas where that's faulty, but that has led to another saying in recent 10, 20 years, where people talk not about the truth, but about my truth. So example, you could have, X amount of people who are out to a party or go to a dance club, and something happens, one of them drinks too much, gets into a fight, and people will say, well, this happened, that happened, and everyone will have their own opinion, and people will argue about that, and they will all say, well, this is my truth. And I'm wondering, what is your idea of that? Do you think that, I mean, obviously we have different perspectives. We could both watch someone do something and see different aspects of it. But do you think that there is a truth or the truth? And is my truth sort of an ethical cop-out oftentimes?
I am strongly opposed to relativism, both ethical relativism, but all forms of relativism. So my position is that in the end there is an accurate description of the way things are. But it's complicated. And because it's complicated,
and is it complicated ethically, or because we are fallible creatures? I mean, I may actually believe that what I see is the truth, even though it may only be 75% so.
It's both. Yeah. It's complicated. I mean, you know, I don't actually see a great difference between the subject of ethics and the subject of economics, or the subject of ethics and the subject of history. You know, historians argue all the time about what happened in the past. Economists argue all the time about, you know, would a tax cut be a good thing or a bad thing? Infrastructure spending, what would be the consequences? So they're constantly disagreeing, but there really is a history there. There's a past to make sense of, and there really is an economy there. It's just complicated, and people disagree about these things and have different perspectives for a whole host of reasons. I just think ethics is the same, religion's the same. You know, I don't think they're as different. I believe that there is a truth. So there is a right and wrong answer in economics. There is a right and wrong answer in history. It's often difficult to establish what it is. And where we're coming from will hugely affect what we think is the case. The reason why I think my truth and your truth talk is basically incoherent is because, you know, if truth is the property of accurately describing the way things are, then you can't have two conflicting descriptions of reality that contradict each other. That doesn't make sense. So, now granted, the culture you're in will affect how you look at the world, but remember that's true of science too. You know, the Aristotelian science was different from Newtonian science, and Newtonian science is different from the new physics. And in different cultures, you know, if you're in a culture which believes the Earth's flat, then you'll believe the Earth's flat is true. And now we know the world's round, pictures of it from outer space. You know, they were wrong in the end. They believed it, they thought it was true that the Earth was flat, but they were mistaken. I think the same is true about ethics. You know, we now know that raping another person is wrong. Torturing babies for fun is wrong. You know, there are a long list of things I think we know. Helping your neighbour is right. So I think this is knowledge. I think we've actually arrived at knowledge. And these things are true. And people who don't believe them are mistaken. Now, there are lots of topics in ethics which get really complicated, like, you know, abortion or euthanasia or medical screening, to go back to that one, or the rights of trees and waterfalls and fountains and birds and animals. You know, these are areas which we continue to discuss and explore. But even there are parameters that actually, and that there is a growing consensus in some of those areas. So I think moral relativism is very problematic because I think if you are a moral relativist, don't believe in the possibility of truth at all, then of course it means the Nazi and the white supremacist is as valid as Mahatma Gandhi and Mother Teresa, and that's not right.
What role does intentionality play in truth? For example, if I came to you and said something that caused you great distress, maybe your wife is gone and I say that she was killed in a car accident, and let's say it's because a policeman came up and told me that your wife had been killed, and I was to go tell you, and it turned out she was misidentified. But if I do, that's me not knowing the truth and passing on false information. But if I did it deliberately because I wanted to hurt you for some reason, that would be different. So we can see intentionality in the difference between untruth and lie. A lie generally being something that is done with intention, and untruth may be unintentional. Is truth itself always based in intention? Can there be an unintentional truth, in other words?
I think you're right to say that the goal of being human is to be morally serious. Part of being morally serious is to seek the truth, and part of being morally serious is to be reflective about the communication of truth. So I think for example, to knowingly pass on a conspiracy theory for which there's no evidence is a deep, to use very traditional language, sin. It's a violation of integrity, divinely intended integrity, and constructive and healthy relationships. So fake news, I think, is disreputable, to be candid, and it's a moral failure when one communicates things that, President Obama did not knowingly tap the White House. So that should not be communicated by anybody. It should not. It's just, there's no evidence for it. And if you're morally serious, you do the hard work of, okay, this claim, I now need to find out whether the claim is true. I do my research. I try to discover whether it's accurate. So yes, intention is huge. And in the end, what you want to cultivate, the goal of good education, good schooling, the liberal arts tradition of the United States of America, the goal of all that is to make sure that a person is morally serious, such that they strive to discover what the truth is, and they're responsible in communicating it. And therefore, intention does matter a great deal.
And I would assume that's also the goal of what you or the people that you work with teach in your class, that you are trying to teach ideas of truth and truth-telling because it makes you a good citizen, it makes you a good person, that kind of thing. That would be, so in that sense, you would say education is not just for the mind, but for the soul or the spirit.
Oh yeah, exactly. No. Education is a goal of being. To learn is what does it mean to be made in the image of God? The Imago Dei. The answer in the tradition, according to the patristic period, is to be made in the image of God is to be a person who exercises rationality with responsibility to arrive at moral discernment, appreciation of beauty and poetry and music. This is what it means to be made in the image of God. This is the reason for being and living. And therefore, what we do in our relationships with each other is we cultivate dispositions and character that actually then radiates out, and we become fuller and more complete human beings as a result. So this really does mean that, education is not, we don't justify education pragmatically. It's not just to get a good job. It's not just earn money. Education is an end in itself. And every human being should strive to be educated. And that's the reason why the work you do is just fabulous. You put all these resources that people can learn from and make them available to people. It's really important.
I'm going to follow up on your comments about art and whatnot in a moment, but one of the reasons I do these interviews and don't try to overly script them is so that people can go off on tangents and whatnot. But I want to pick up before I go there on something that you had said too. What, for you personally, and I'm talking about Ian Markham, as a personal person, irregardless of your religious beliefs, what would happen to your worldview if somehow there was an irrefutable truth that came out that said that most of what you believed was wrong? Maybe it's a revelation about ethics, maybe it's a revelation about the creation of the cosmos, maybe it's that God does not exist, maybe that human beings were created by aliens, or whatever other beliefs some people have. If there was some fundamental seismic shift in what you determined as the truth of reality in the cosmos, would that be something you'd want to know?
Yes, I would. So, unlike the screening question, where I'm pragmatically nervous, and also not just pragmatically, because I do think the concept of being genetically sick is a deeply problematic concept. And I also think the data you get from screening is it's almost all probability insertions. So it's not like you just know there's a probability of X or Y. So unlike that, where I think ignorance is to be commended and actually helpful, when it comes to the metaphysics, I'm staking my life. I mean, I become a priest. I'm running a seminary. I write books. So I've staked my life on the claim that God is, and Jesus Christ is a disclosure of God, and that the church is a divine entity revealing the true reason for the universe, and the goal of human flourishing and to overcome egotism, selfishness is the reason for being. I've staked my life on all that. And if, let's take that lovely scenario, we discover that actually aliens created humans, and there's irrefutable proof of that, then yeah, I'll stop being Christian. I will stop believing in God. I'll go off and find something else to do. And I would have to adjust my worldview in huge, dramatic ways. But I'm pretty confident that thesis isn't going to be proven, and I don't think it's true.
It's interesting that you mentioned percentages when talking about screening, health screenings versus something that could be 100% proven true. I'm wondering, just as a brief tangent, is that one of the reasons that there are prohibitions throughout most religions against gambling, because it has uncertainties in it? That just popped into my head, because if you seem to be willing to go from a 0% belief in something to 100% if it's proven, but if there's only a 65, 70, 75% chance, you're not willing to take that gamble. I'm just wondering if that's something behind why gambling has often been seen as a sin. This is just a digression, but...
Yeah, no, it's an interesting idea. My guess is the primary reason why gambling is viewed as a sin is that it's not an appropriate way to acquire resources. So it's a denial of, there's a great tradition in the Christian tradition that honours work. Work is an intrinsic good. People should work. And in working, one actually is rewarded for one's labour, contribution to society, and that is the way you should get resources. The problem with gambling is that it's actually exploitative, because the person who wins all the time is the slot machines inside the casino, and it's actually aspiring to reap rewards in a way that's not appropriate. Just in passing, I don't mind gambling personally. I occasionally buy a lottery ticket when I've been to the casino. It's advisable to avoid the addiction. I mean, there is something weird about being human, the way in which we can form pattern behaviour that is so self-destructive. And gambling is an area where one's got to be careful. But no, I don't think primarily what's going on there is a problem with uncertainty. Christians are okay with uncertainty. Religious people are okay with uncertainty. The great mantra, the opposite of faith isn't doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. I think there's some truth in that. I think that we do actually need to recognize that the complexity of what we're talking about when we talk about God is so vast. Most of our assertions are probability assertions.
Well, let me get back to then talking about, as I mentioned, art and whatnot. A famous poem, Ode on a Grecian Urn by John Keats, has the line where it equates beauty with truth and truth beauty, and oftentimes other artists have equated God with truth, and therefore you could say God is beauty. Is this just sort of metaphorical or metaphysical posturing, do you think? Because as an artist, I reject the idea that art is truth. Art, by the very nature of its word, ars, artifice, they come from the same roots, is to lie, to maybe reveal a greater reality. But what is your take on the idea of art revealing some truth, or do you equate art with truth like John Keats did, or beauty with truth, and that whole kind of spectrum that artists use to equate basically truth with God?
I'm very sympathetic to that trajectory of human thought and theology. So yes, I go in steps. Remember, the goal of the Truth Project is to accurately describe the way things are. And in my judgment, the least effective way of describing how things are is through sentences and propositions. Give me an artist, give me a poet, give me a musician. They are much likely to capture the essence of something than a philosopher using deductive arguments. So I think art is the work of revelation, disclosure, discovery, illustrating the complexity of what we're experiencing and how to look at things. So yes, no, I'm a big fan of that trajectory. And I do think that, to take music for a moment, music is I think, one of the most religious moments that humans can enjoy, because it really does lift you out of yourself and take you to a place that's undoubtedly spiritual. And therefore, I think, when I talk about what sort of God do I believe in, God is spirit that embraces everything that is, has a center of consciousness, so there's agency and decision and love, with whom we can be in a relationship that embodies the ultimate complexity of whatever everything is, and therefore embodies beauty, art, and music.
I want to ask a final question before we wrap up, and it's related to this. I've often argued with other artists that I think there's a difference between truth and reality. To me, art is a translator of reality. It helps us see life more clearly, whether it's emotional life, whether it's the physical world. And I think a religious person would probably have a similar view, and it would be in this manner, that God is not truth, but God, in a religious person's mind, would be the underlying reality of all things, and truth is sort of an outflow of that underlying reality. So God isn't truth, because truth is something that flows from God, the way a tear or blood or some less nice effluences flow from human beings. Would you be consonant with a view like that God is not truth per se, but God is the underlying reality, and truth is just one of those things that comes from that reality? The reality is the loam, and truth as a flower, or say a plant of that reality.
I think on the whole, I would be slightly different from that. I think on the whole, I see truth and reality as synonyms.
Yeah.
What I hear you doing is perhaps, and in this respect, I'm sympathetic to what you're doing. If you define the category truth as propositional, fact-asserting sentences about the way things are, then that could be a flower coming out of the underlying reality. But if you have a broader definition of truth, which doesn't simply limit it to fact-asserting sentences, to words, then I think you can and should recognize that God, reality, and truth are actually all synonyms. And that's the reason why I think the poets and the musicians and the artists are closer to truth / reality / God than almost all the books that have been written about God, all the liturgies, all the lectures that are out there. In the end, poets see the way things really are.
Well, to wrap up, I'm going to link to your Wikipedia page. I know there's some links to your VTS page there. I've been looking for them, but they seem to be outdated. But let me just ask, because I'm looking at some of the books you've written. It looks like it's been a few years since your last book. What is your next book, whether it's about truth or not, and regarding truth, at some point in the future, do you have anything more to write about that subject?
I'm working on a book now called The New Apologetics. So the idea is, how do we defend faith? And the argument of the book is actually linked to truth. So it's exploring the idea that the truth about the universe isn't that we're complicated bundles of atoms that emerge from nowhere and will face extinction when we die. That's a very impoverished worldview. It doesn't make sense of consciousness. It's not compatible with the contemporary discoveries in physics. It's implausible in all sorts of ways. Instead, the truth about the universe is actually spiritually infused. It's animated. We need to listen afresh to the indigenous cultures of the world. We need to be a little bit more humble in our relationships with Africa and Asia and parts of the world which are combining modernity with a strong sense of the spiritual. And that's this project I'm working on. That book should be coming out sometime next year.
It sounds like you have a more inclusive worldview than a lot of more traditional or conservative religious thought.
Oh, definitely. No, I think, for me, this universe is really complicated. Mm. God is really complicated. And therefore we need a lot of voices. It's a bit like, if I was an economist, would I only want to listen to one school of thought? No. So I want to listen to all the schools of thought and be in conversation with them and learn from them. Mm-hmm. And in so doing, commend a vision that captures the essence of faith, mm-hmm. And invites others to participate in it.
I wish we had more time. I know you have to go, so let me just ask a final question then. Would you say then that the Christian God, Yahweh, Allah, the Abrahamic faith, also is manifested in the Buddha, in whoever the religious or the God figures are in Hinduism, Jainism, Native Americanism, whatever the faith that the Maoris or the Aborigines have? Does God manifest himself, you believe, in ways appropriate to whatever culture he or it engages?
I think, yes, in short. I think that every religious tradition is an attempt to try and make sense of the complexity of what God is. And almost all of them have an angle that is part of the overall reality and truth of what God and how He wants to relate to this universe is like. So yes, I believe it's one should, as a morally civilized person, strive to be conversation with all the faith traditions of the world.
Well, on that note, let me just thank you, Dean Ian Markham, for spending an hour or so speaking with me about truth.
And this is a great series. You're doing a really important thing in progressing the issues of truth and making these resources available. So thank you very much.